The moment you react emotionally, you give other people control over your mind. That's why powerful people learn one dangerous skill: never react again. There was a time in Ethan's life when every small thing controlled his emotions completely. Criticism ruined his entire day. Disrespect made him furious instantly. Arguments consumed his mind for hours. Even strangers' opinions had the power to disturb his peace deeply. He reacted to everything emotionally because he believed reacting proved strength. If someone insulted him, he answered immediately. If someone doubted him, he tried desperately to prove himself. If someone hurt him, anger took control of his actions. But over time, Ethan noticed something painful. Every emotional reaction left him exhausted, while the people provoking him remained unaffected. One evening, after losing his temper during a public argument that embarrassed him deeply, Ethan walked alone through the city feeling ashamed of himself. Sitting quietly inside a small train station late at night, he noticed an older man calmly reading while chaos unfolded around him. Nearby, passengers argued loudly, announcements echoed constantly, and noise filled the station. Yet the old man remained completely peaceful. Curious, Ethan finally asked, "How you stay calm when people are so irritating?" The old man closed his book slowly before replying softly, "Because I stopped giving people control over my emotions." Those words hit Ethan harder than any insult ever had. The old man introduced himself as Samuel and explained something life-changing. Every emotional reaction is a form of surrender. The moment someone can control your emotions, Samuel said calmly, they control part of your mind. Sitting there beneath the cold station lights, Ethan realized something shocking for the first time in his life. His reactions were not strength. They were weakness disguised as power. Over the following weeks, Ethan began meeting Samuel regularly during quiet evenings after work. During one conversation, Ethan admitted honestly, "Sometimes I react before I even think." Samuel nodded calmly before replying, "Because your emotions became faster than your awareness." Ethan looked confused, so Samuel explained further. Most people live on emotional autopilot. Someone insults them, they react. Someone ignores them, they overthink. Someone disrespects them, they explode emotionally. Their mind never pauses long enough to choose wisdom. Those words forced Ethan to reflect deeply on himself. He realized almost every conflict in his life came from impulsive emotional reactions. Samuel then gave him a difficult challenge. For 30 days, Ethan could not react immediately to anything emotionally provoking. No instant anger, no defensive arguments, no emotional messages, no impulsive responses. "Pause first," Samuel said softly. Silence reveals truth faster than emotional reactions. At first, the challenge felt impossible. During work meetings, criticism still triggered anger inside him. During arguments, his mind still demanded immediate responses. But slowly, Ethan began noticing something important. Most emotional situations lost power when he stayed calm long enough. Arguments ended faster. Manipulative people became frustrated when they could not provoke him. Insults felt weaker when he refused giving them emotional energy. And for the first time in his life, Ethan realized silence itself could become strength. One afternoon during heavy traffic, another driver rolled down his window and screamed insults aggressively at Ethan after a minor mistake on the road. Instantly, Ethan felt anger rise inside him like fire. His heart raced. His hands tightened against the steering wheel. The old version of him would have reacted immediately with equal aggression, but then Samuel's voice echoed inside his mind. The first person who loses emotional control loses the battle. Ethan took a slow breath instead and drove away silently. Minutes later, the anger disappeared almost completely. Sitting at a red light afterward, he suddenly realized something powerful. Emotional reactions create temporary satisfaction, but long-term exhaustion. If he had reacted aggressively, the situation could have escalated dangerously over nothing meaningful. Later that evening, Samuel smiled faintly after hearing the story and said softly, "Calmness saves people from destroying their own peace." Ethan understood those words deeply now. Most chaos in life begins because people react emotionally before thinking clearly. As months passed, Ethan slowly transformed into someone much calmer and emotionally disciplined. People around him noticed the difference immediately. One evening during dinner, an old friend joked, "You become too quiet lately." Ethan smiled slightly before replying softly, "No, I just stopped reacting to everything." The room became silent for a moment because his answer carried truth everyone secretly understood. Ethan explained how reacting emotionally gives other people enormous power over your inner state. Manipulative people especially depend on reactions. They provoke, insult, criticize, and disrespect specifically to control emotions. But calm people become difficult to manipulate because they no longer react impulsively. "Silence protects peace," Ethan said calmly. "Reactions often destroy it." Those words deeply affected everyone listening because they recognized how much unnecessary suffering emotional reactions had created throughout their own lives. One cold winter evening, Samuel invited Ethan to walk through a quiet park outside the city while snow slowly covered the ground around them. As they walked beneath dim streetlights, Samuel asked softly, "Do you know why powerful people stay calm?" Ethan thought carefully before answering. "Because they're emotionally stronger?" Samuel nodded before replying. "And because they understand reactions are expensive." Ethan listened carefully while Samuel continued. "Every emotional reaction costs energy, peace, clarity, and sometimes even relationships or opportunities." Those words stayed deeply inside Ethan's mind afterward. He realized how much of his life he wasted reacting emotionally to temporary situations, temporary people, and temporary opinions. Most of those things never truly mattered in the long run anyway. Looking at the falling snow quietly covering the empty streets around him, Ethan finally understood one of life's greatest truths. Peace begins when unnecessary reactions end. As the years passed, Ethan became known as someone unusually calm no matter what happened around him. At work, while others panicked during stressful situations, he stayed composed enough to think clearly. During arguments, he listened more than he spoke. When people tried provoking him emotionally, he often responded with silence instead of anger. Many misunderstood his calmness at first. Some believed he had become cold emotionally. Others assumed he simply stopped caring. But the truth was different. Ethan cared deeply. He had simply learned that not every emotion deserved expression. One afternoon, a co-worker mocked him publicly during a meeting, hoping to embarrass him in front of everyone. The room became awkwardly silent while people waited for Ethan to react aggressively. But instead, he smiled calmly and continued speaking peacefully. Later, one colleague asked him privately, "How did you stay so calm?" Ethan replied softly, "Because protecting my peace became more important than protecting my ego." Those words reflected years of growth. He finally understood that many battles are won the moment you refuse participating emotionally. One rainy evening, Samuel shared one of the deepest lessons Ethan had ever heard. Sitting quietly beside a small cafe window while rain tapped softly against the glass, Samuel said, "Most people react emotionally because they are controlled internally by ego." Ethan listened carefully while Samuel explained further. The ego constantly wants to defend itself, prove itself, and protect its image. That is why criticism hurts people so deeply. Those words struck Ethan powerfully because he realized many of his past reactions came from wounded pride rather than wisdom. He reacted because he wanted the last word. He reacted because he wanted to feel respected. He reacted because his ego could not tolerate discomfort. Samuel then leaned forward slightly and added softly, "A calm mind no longer needs to win every argument." Ethan sat silently for several moments because he understood how much unnecessary suffering his ego created throughout his life. From that day forward, he began asking himself one important question whenever emotions rose strongly inside him. Am I protecting peace or protecting ego? And slowly, that question changed the way he handled everything. Months later, Ethan faced one of the hardest emotional tests of his life when someone close to him betrayed his trust completely. The pain cut deeply through him. Anger filled his mind constantly. Part of him wanted revenge. Another part wanted confrontation. For several nights, he barely slept because emotions consumed him internally. Eventually, overwhelmed by frustration, Ethan visited Samuel and admitted honestly, "I don't know how to stay calm anymore." Samuel looked at him quietly before replying softly, "Calmness matters most during painful moments." Those words stayed inside Ethan deeply. Samuel explained that emotional reactions during pain often create permanent damage. Angry words destroy relationships forever. Revenge destroys character. Emotional impulsiveness creates regret. Pain passes eventually, Samuel said calmly, but consequences remain. Over the following weeks, Ethan forced himself to remain patient instead of reacting emotionally. Slowly, clarity returned, and with clarity came wisdom. Looking back later, Ethan realized something powerful. Silence protected him from becoming someone pain tried turning him into. As Ethan entered middle age, younger people often came to him asking how to become mentally stronger. One frustrated young man once admitted, "I can't stop reacting emotionally to disrespect." Ethan smiled faintly because he once struggled with the exact same weakness. Looking calmly across the table, he replied softly, "The need to react comes from emotional insecurity." The young man looked confused, so Ethan explained further. People who constantly react emotionally usually depend too much on external validation. They feel every insult threatens their value. Those words deeply affected the young man because he recognized the truth immediately. Ethan then continued, "Strong people understand something different. Other people's words do not define their worth." He explained how emotional reactions give strangers power over internal peace. But emotionally disciplined people protect their energy carefully. "Not every insult deserves your attention," Ethan said calmly, "and not every battle deserves your participation." Those lessons slowly changed the young man's mindset forever. One quiet winter morning, years after first meeting Samuel, Ethan returned alone to the old train station where his journey toward emotional mastery began. Sitting on the same bench beneath cold morning light, he reflected deeply on how much his life changed simply because he learned one skill: remaining calm. Before, his emotions controlled his relationships, decisions, peace, and identity. But now, silence felt powerful instead of uncomfortable. Looking around the crowded station filled with stressed, angry, emotionally reactive people rushing through life, Ethan realized most suffering begins internally long before it appears externally. The inability to control emotions quietly destroys peace, opportunities, and relationships every single day. Closing his eyes for a moment, Ethan remembered Samuel's greatest lesson clearly. Never react immediately. Time reveals what emotions try to hide, And sitting there peacefully while trains moved through the station around him, Ethan finally understood the deepest truth of all. Real power was never found in dominating other people. Real power was learning how to remain calm when life expected chaos from him to end the final years of his life. Ethan became someone whose presence alone brought calmness into every room he entered. People often wonder how he remained so peaceful while the world around him stayed filled with noise, conflict, stress, and emotional chaos. But what they never saw were the thousands of invisible battles he fought inside himself for years. The moments where anger demanded reaction, but he chose silence. The moments where pain demanded revenge, but he chose restraint. The moments where ego demanded victory, but he chose peace instead. One evening during sunset, while sitting alone beside a quiet river watching the water move gently beneath golden light, Ethan reflected on everything Samuel had taught him. He realized the ability to remain calm is not weakness, coldness, or lack of emotion. It is mastery, because reacting emotionally is easy. Anyone can shout, argue, insult, or lose control when feelings become intense. But staying calm while emotions burn inside you requires enormous discipline and self-awareness. Ethan remembered how much suffering he created in his younger years, simply because he reacted too quickly to temporary emotions and temporary people. One angry moment damaged relationships. One emotional decision created regret. One impulsive reaction disturbed peace for days. But once he learned how to pause before reacting, life slowly became lighter. Arguments lost power. Manipulative people lost influence. Stress stopped controlling his mind completely. And most importantly, he stopped becoming a prisoner of his own emotions. Looking toward the peaceful sunset disappearing beyond the horizon, Ethan smiled softly because he finally understood one of life's greatest secrets. Silence is not empty. Silence is control. And the moment a man no longer reacts emotionally to everything around him, he becomes free from things that once controlled his entire life. Years after Samuel disappeared from Ethan's life, his teachings continued living inside him every single day. One evening, while walking through a crowded street filled with noise, arguments, and restless energy, Ethan noticed something strange about the modern world. Almost everyone was reacting emotionally to everything. Social media controlled moods. Opinions created anger instantly. Small disagreements destroyed friendships. People argued endlessly trying to defend pride, ego, and temporary emotions. Watching the chaos around him, Ethan realized most people were not truly living peacefully. They were simply reacting continuously without awareness. One young man accidentally bumped into Ethan aggressively and immediately began shouting insults, expecting conflict. Years earlier, Ethan would have reacted automatically, but now, he simply stepped aside calmly and continued walking without saying a word. The young man stood there confused because he expected emotional resistance. As Ethan walked away silently beneath the cold city lights, he remembered one of Samuel's old lessons. When you refuse to react, you refuse to surrender control of your mind. Those words carried enormous truth. Emotional reactions often trap people inside unnecessary suffering. But silence breaks that cycle immediately. For the first time, Ethan understood why calm people appear powerful without trying. Their peace does not depend on controlling others. It depends on controlling themselves. Late one winter night, Ethan sat alone inside his apartment while heavy rain moved against the windows outside. The room was completely silent except for the soft ticking of an old clock beside him. Looking back on his life, Ethan realized how much pain he avoided simply because he learned how to pause before reacting emotionally. Many relationships survived because he stayed calm during arguments. Many opportunities remained open because he controlled anger under pressure. Many regrets never happened because silence protected him from impulsive decisions. And most importantly, his inner peace remained intact because he stopped giving temporary emotions permanent power over his life. Sitting quietly in the darkness, Ethan wrote one final sentence inside his journal before closing it slowly. The strongest man in a room is usually the calmest one. He stared at those words for several moments because they perfectly reflected everything life had taught him. Real strength was never loudness, aggression, or emotional dominance. Real strength was remaining peaceful while the world tried to disturb your mind. And as rain continued falling softly through the silent night outside, Ethan smiled faintly to himself because he finally understood the greatest freedom a person can ever experience. The freedom of no longer reacting to everything that once controlled him emotionally. One autumn evening, Ethan was invited to speak to a group of young men struggling with anger, stress, heartbreak, and emotional confusion. As he stood quietly before them, he could see exhaustion in their eyes, the same exhaustion he once carried himself years ago. One of them finally asked, "How do we stop reacting emotionally when people hurt us?" Ethan remained silent for several moments before answering softly, "By understanding that not every action deserves your energy." The room became completely still. Ethan explained how emotionally reactive people unknowingly hand their peace to everyone around them. A stranger's insult ruins their mood. A rejection destroys their confidence. A betrayal consumes their thoughts for months. When your emotions depend entirely on other people's behavior, Ethan said calmly, your peace will always remain fragile. Those words hit deeply because everyone listening recognized that weakness inside themselves immediately. Ethan then shared something Samuel once taught him long ago. Silence is not weakness. Silence is emotional discipline. He explained that calm people still feel anger, sadness, and pain deeply. The difference is they do not allow emotions to control their actions automatically. Instead, they observe emotions carefully before responding wisely. Looking around the silent room filled with thoughtful faces, Ethan added one final truth. The world will always try to provoke you emotionally. Real strength is choosing peace anyway. Late that night after the gathering ended, Ethan walked alone through empty streets beneath a dark sky filled with stars. The city around him had finally become quiet, and for the first time in years, he truly appreciated silence completely. Years earlier, silence made him uncomfortable because he constantly needed noise, arguments, distractions, and reactions to feel alive emotionally. But now, silence felt like freedom. Stopping beside a small bridge overlooking the river, Ethan reflected deeply on the man he used to be. The angry young version of himself who believed reacting emotionally proved strength. Back then, he wasted enormous energy trying to defend his ego, prove himself to people, and fight battles that never truly mattered. But emotional maturity changed everything. He finally understood that peace is more valuable than winning arguments. Calmness is more valuable than revenge. And silence often speaks louder than emotional chaos ever can. Looking toward the calm water moving beneath the moonlight, Ethan smiled softly because he realized something beautiful. The moment a person no longer reacts emotionally to every insult, disappointment, or provocation, life itself becomes lighter. And standing there peacefully beneath the quiet night sky, Ethan understood the greatest victory of all was not controlling the world around him. It was mastering the world within himself. One freezing winter morning before sunrise, Ethan sat alone at the old train station where his entire journey toward emotional mastery first began years ago. The station was nearly empty, except for the distant sound of trains moving slowly through the fog-covered tracks. Sitting quietly on the same wooden bench where Samuel once changed his life with a few simple words, Ethan reflected deeply on how much emotional control had transformed him over the years. Before, his life felt like constant warfare inside his own mind. Every insult felt personal. Every disappointment felt unbearable. Every disagreement became emotional chaos. He wasted enormous energy reacting to things that never truly deserved his peace. But now, after years of discipline and silence, he understood something most people never realize. Reacting emotionally rarely solves problems. It usually multiplies them. Looking around the quiet station, Ethan noticed stressed faces rushing everywhere. People arguing on phones, complaining angrily, overthinking constantly, carrying invisible emotional storms inside themselves. And for the first time, he felt genuine gratitude for every painful lesson life forced him to learn. Because without those painful moments, he might never have discovered the power of calmness. Closing his eyes for a moment while a cold wind moved through the station around him, Ethan remembered Samuel's greatest truth clearly. The calmer you become, the clearer you see. And sitting there peacefully beneath the pale morning light, Ethan finally understood the full meaning behind those words. A calm mind sees reality clearly. An emotional mind sees only chaos. Later that same evening, Ethan received a message from someone who once deeply hurt him years earlier. The person apologized sincerely for the pain they caused and admitted regret for how they treated him in the past. Reading those words brought old memories rushing back suddenly. Anger, sadness, betrayal, disappointment. For several moments, Ethan simply stared silently at the screen while emotions moved through his mind like waves. Years earlier, he would have reacted immediately from pain or ego, but now, he remained still long enough for clarity to return first. After thinking quietly for several minutes, he replied respectfully without reopening old emotional wounds. Then he placed the phone aside peacefully and continued his evening calmly. Sitting near the window while rain softly touched the glass outside, Ethan realized something powerful in that moment. Emotional control had healed parts of him revenge never could. Silence gave him peace that arguments never provided. Calmness protected his heart from becoming bitter. And learning not to react emotionally had ultimately freed him from carrying unnecessary pain for years. Looking out toward the dark city lights glowing beneath the rain, Ethan smiled faintly because he finally understood one of life's deepest truths. The greatest form of self-control is remaining peaceful even when you have every reason to lose control. As Ethan entered the final stage of his life, people often came to him searching for answers about peace, emotional strength, and self-control. One evening, a young man asked him quietly, "How do I stop letting people affect my emotions so much?" Ethan looked thoughtfully toward a fading sunset before replying softly, "Stop giving people the power to decide your inner peace." The young man listened carefully while Ethan explained something most people never understand. The world will always contain disrespect, rejection, criticism, and disappointment, he said calmly. But suffering grows when you allow those things to live inside your mind permanently. Ethan explained how emotional reactions are often automatic because people never train themselves to pause. They immediately absorb negativity, argue emotionally, or overthink endlessly. But mentally strong people learn how to protect their inner world carefully. Not every opinion deserves your attention, Ethan continued. Not every insult deserves your anger, and not every situation deserves your emotional energy. Those words deeply affected the young man, because for the first time, he realized peace is not found by controlling the world. It is found by controlling yourself within the world. Looking at the calm expression on Ethan's face beneath the golden evening light, the young man finally understood why silence often feels more powerful than endless reactions. Late that night, Ethan walked alone beside the quiet river outside the city, while cold wind moved gently through the trees around him. The water flowed peacefully beneath the moonlight, untouched by the noise and chaos of the world beyond it. Standing there in complete silence, Ethan reflected on the younger version of himself who once believed strength meant always reacting, always defending, always fighting emotionally. Back then, he confused emotional intensity with power. But life eventually taught him something deeper. Real power is calmness. Real strength is restraint. Real wisdom is knowing when silence protects more than words ever could. He realized most people spend their entire lives emotionally controlled by temporary situations and temporary people because they never learn how to master themselves internally. But once a person develops emotional discipline, life changes completely. Stress loses power. Manipulation stops working. Peace becomes stable. Looking toward the endless dark sky filled with stars above him, Ethan smiled softly because he finally understood the greatest reward of never reacting emotionally again: freedom. Freedom from anger controlling his actions. Freedom from other people controlling his peace. Freedom from becoming a slave to temporary emotions. And standing there peacefully beside the river beneath the silent night sky, Ethan knew with complete certainty that mastering reactions was one of the greatest victories of his entire life. One quiet morning before sunrise, Ethan sat alone on a hill overlooking the sleeping city below, while cold air moved softly around him. Watching the first light slowly appear across the horizon, he reflected on how different his life became after learning one simple lesson. Not everything deserves a reaction. Years earlier, he wasted enormous amounts of energy trying to defend himself, explain himself, and emotionally fight every battle placed in front of him. But most of those battles never truly mattered in the long run. The arguments faded. The people disappeared. The insults became meaningless. Yet the emotional damage he caused himself through constant reactions remained for years. Looking toward the peaceful sunrise, Ethan finally understood something powerful. Reacting emotionally gives temporary people permanent access to your peace. That realization changed everything. The calmer he became, the more clearly he saw the world. Manipulative people became easier to recognize. Fake relationships became obvious. Meaningless drama stopped attracting his attention. And because he no longer reacted impulsively, he began making wiser decisions in every part of life. Sitting there beneath the growing morning light, Ethan whispered softly to himself, "Peace begins where reactions end." And deep inside, he knew it was one of the truest lessons life had ever taught him. In the final evening of his life, Ethan returned one last time to the old train station where Samuel first taught him the power of silence many years earlier. The station looked almost unchanged, the dim lights, the empty benches, the distant sound of trains moving through the night. Sitting quietly alone while cold wind moved through the platform, Ethan closed his eyes and reflected on the journey his mind had taken throughout life. He remembered the angry young man he once was, constantly controlled by ego, emotions, fear, and impulsive reactions. But through pain, discipline, silence, and wisdom, he slowly transformed into someone peaceful enough that the world could no longer disturb him easily. Looking around the quiet station one final time, Ethan smiled softly because he understood the greatest truth of all now. Calmness is not weakness. It is mastery. The strongest people are not those who react loudly to everything around them. The strongest people are those who remain peaceful while chaos tries to pull them apart emotionally. As the sound of an approaching train echoed softly through the silent night, Ethan whispered the final lesson Samuel ever taught him: never react emotionally to temporary things. And sitting there peacefully beneath the fading station lights, Ethan realized he had finally achieved something more valuable than power, money, or recognition. He had mastered himself.